Good afternoon. On behalf of the Sovereign Order of Malta, I would like to thank all of you for coming to this event, Mobilizing Against Trafficking, Exploitation and Modern Slavery in Sport, a call to action. Linked to the 56th session of the Human Rights Council, I express my special gratitude to the co-organizer, Mission 89, with Mrs. Lerina Bright next to me, and the permanent missions co-sponsoring this event, the Holy See and the Order of Malta. Today, I would like to welcome and thank our expert speakers. First, Professor Parosha CHANDRAN, who will be the moderator. He is Professor of Practice in Modern Slavery Law in the Dickson Poon School of Law at the King's College in London. Kevin HYLAND, OBE, keynote speaker, founding member and global strategy director of the Santa Marta Group, an anti-trafficking charity that aims to act as a catalyst for law enforcement. He has 30 years of experience in police investigation, and from 2010, head of the establishment of the Metropolitan Police Human Trafficking Response in the UK, including the security of the 2012 Olympics in London. And from 2014 to May 2018, first independent anti-slavery commissioner for the UK government, and from 2018, Ireland's representative to the Council of Europe Independent Group of Experts for Trafficking, the GRETA. Then Lerina Bright, Executive Director and founder of Mission 89, Catherine Leslie, Safeguarding Senior Manager FIFA, Amy Eun Buell Park, Certified Safeguarding Officer, Integrity Officer of the World Baseball Softball Confederation, WBSC, and online through a video message, a very powerful video message actually, John Michael Lander, a survivor of child sexual abuse, certified trainer and life coach for the Self-Talk Institute, Voice for the Voiceless. He is the founder of an athlete's silence. As an athlete, he silently endured sexual abuse and trafficking from adults and trusted with his training while winning gold medals at the Norway and Danish Cups. He broke his silence with the TED Talk, An Athlete's Silence. Trafficking in human beings is present in all areas. Its development in sports and one major sporting events remains unknown, largely unknown. It poses complex challenges that will be discussed during this event with a panel of experts and a victim's testimony. The U.S. Department of State, including trafficking in sports, for the first time in their 2020 TIP report, and estimated that within Europe's soccer industry alone, it is estimated that there are 15,000 human trafficking victims every year, mainly from West Africa. Due to this lack of data, the scope of trafficking in sports is difficult to determine. Trafficking in sports is predominantly found in football, baseball, ice hockey, and basketball, but also in lesser research sports. Briefly, I would like to underline the value of the global thematic report on trafficking in sports, being in production under the auspices of Mission 89, the co-organizers of this event, and I would like to highlight also the very important work of Mission 89 under the leadership of Lerina Bright. I would also like to mention the excellent work of Secours Catholique, Caritas France, in the fight against human trafficking in the context of the Paris Olympic Games, and the good cooperation we have with the Permanent Mission of France in Geneva. Without further ado, I would like to hand over now to our keynote speaker, Kevin HYLAND, and then Professor Parosha CHANDRAN will take over as our moderator. So, Kevin, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Ambassador Veuthey, for inviting me and for allowing me to participate in this event with fellow panelists. The term human trafficking is often misused and misunderstood, conflated with smuggling or other events, and viewed in many cases as inevitable when there are things including vulnerability, such as where there is poverty, climate displacement, gender inequality, corruption, and many other causes. But what needs to be remembered and reinforced is that human trafficking is a serious crime and is never inevitable. It's where vulnerability is preyed upon in the vast majority of cases to make money. The most recent figures disclose that almost 50 million people worldwide are exploited in human trafficking and modern slavery, generating an income of $236 billion in illicit gains every year. This means that this is the second most lucrative crime on the planet, running behind drugs, but way ahead of the 120 billion earned in the illegal dealing in weapons and firearms. So when we speak of this, we must remember what it is. And one area where trafficking has been present for many years, but is rarely spoken of, is here in the issue of sport. Sport, as we know, is associated with achievement, with exceptionalism, and is aligned to patriotism, or a country, or perhaps a team or region. It is often a way that people remove themselves from vulnerability. But even when they try to do that, it is preyed upon, I specifically say, by criminals. In recent decades, and it's also become associated with wealth. Sport is sponsored by big business and having influence to shape political thinking. For example, some brands associated to sport can use that wealth and that influence to actually influence broadcasting rights or community infrastructures. And they may want to associate themselves with a political leader or a particular political stance. We do also see that sports and sports personalities have used their influence for very good purposes. For example, Manchester United Marcus Rashford's school dinners campaign has received many accolades and brought a U-turn on much condemned government policy. But sport has become synonymous with money. That is something that has made it attractive and seen as a good way for criminals to infiltrate it, with particularly when we talk about human trafficking, low levels of risk. And of course, these criminals don't just seek this out in sport, they seek it out wherever it is, in supply chains, in vulnerable communities, and in many forms, including in the sale of organs from young children who are in very vulnerable situations, as we see in Afghanistan. So how do we turn this? How do we change this system? Well, we need to see this for what it is. And we need to, as we'll hear from FIFA, developing processes that integrate safeguarding into every element of their business. How do we actually address this? It has to be through prevention. Little is done on prevention. Yes, of course, when it happens, there should be sanction. There should be outcomes that are negative to the traffickers, to the business, to those who profit. But prevention is far better. I have personally met boys from Africa who, when I met them in southern Italy, had arrived expecting to join some of the best football teams in Europe. Despite crossing the Mediterranean in a dangerous boat, being accommodated in poor conditions in a camp in southern Italy, they still argue with me that their need to get to meet their agent at Termini Station in Rome was so important to them. They had been brainwashed into believing that the opportunity for them was greater than any risk. And someone like me was only somebody who was trying to prevent them from reaching their dream, perhaps thinking I might be jealous, perhaps thinking that we didn't want to welcome them into Europe. And of course, what was known is those boys, when they reached Termini Station in Rome, would not be meeting with the football team or anything to do with that, but were being entered into paedophile markets that were operating across Europe. But we must remember it's not limited to football, it's across many sports, and we will hear about that when we have the presentation by Michel Veuthey. It shows how his talent became the means to exploitation. And it goes beyond the participants. It goes beyond the people in sport. As we see with Michael's case, it was those who were surrounding him who were saying they were going to represent him legally and as agents in his promotion. But also, when we look at official merchandise, when we look at merchandise for big Olympic sports or football sports or the Super Bowl, where are they made? And there's been many disclosures where they have been made at the hands of children in forced labour and those who are being exploited. In 2012, I led on the human trafficking elements of the Metropolitan Police in London. And at the outset, we started planning for that at least 2 years beforehand. We got involved in prevention around the construction industry. Many simple things were brought in about checking the qualifications of the workers, about accommodation, about what the merchandise that would be sold, and identifying the risks and building policies to mitigate them in consultation with what's called LOCOG, which was the Olympic Committee, and the London Mayor's Office, which fed into central government. And then during the Paralympics and the Olympics, there were measures put in place, particularly to protect women who were seen to perhaps work in sexual exploitation, in prostitution, in the region and the area where the Games was being held, an area well known for women working in prostitution. And the policy I brought in was that women would not be arrested during that period for working in prostitution. They would be supported. And that support was put together by religious sisters, by the National Health Service, by volunteers, and by the Metropolitan Police, collectively funded by the Metropolitan Police. And during that period, we actually saw a reduction in trafficking and exploitation, and there was very little, if any, women who were exploited on the streets of London. But we need to make sure that when we are planning for these big sporting events, that we are looking at the workers' conditions leading up to the Olympic events or any other world sport. We need to have policies on merchandise. We need to have local police and security services aware and checking the risks. We need to include airlines in what the risks are. We need to include transport systems. So it's across government. And of course, if it does go wrong, we need to make sure that we have safeguarding in place so that people are protected and are not further prosecuted or persecuted. Recently, I've looked at modern slavery statements or commitments by some of the leading sports clubs in the United Kingdom required under the Modern Slavery Act and in Australia. Their ambition to address their sports and the ambition to succeed in all they do isn't replicated in their statements. Many of them read, "We do not manufacture or produce goods," as if this mitigates them from what happens elsewhere in their supply chains. And of course, the new EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which will affect companies trading on over 450 million with 1,000 employees, will have impact for many of those organisations. So we need to see that over the next few years as they are rolled out, these statements are effective, real, and prevent the issue of human trafficking and modern slavery. An organisation that I'm working with closely now is the G20, to see how we can upscale the presence of prevention in this crime. For example, many of the operations, when I look at the Super Bowl, are about during the event, not leading up to it. And it's all about responses when it happens, as opposed to the planning for the 12 months, 24 months ahead of it. With a small amount of investment by the sports leaders in that field, for example, a lot of prevention can happen that will have impact, not just in their own sport, but also in the community. When I look at this issue of human trafficking and modern slavery, I think about the many different people I've met all around the world. I think about boys that I've met in Nigeria who told me about their promises to go to the land of the UK to play for some of the best Premier League teams. I think about the boys I met in southern Italy who were promised that they were going to play for some of the biggest teams in Europe. I also think about people who have no hope or believe they have no hope in parts of the world where we can have influence. For example, with the G20, the $870 billion US every year in remittances that has money stolen from it, that is a large sum of money that could build communities so that people, migrants who are going elsewhere to work, if their money was sent home to their families, they would have an opportunity. And if we made sure that legally, companies and governments in particular had to be accountable for their supply chains. 1 in every $5 spent in the world is by a government. Nobody has mandated a government to spend that money where it ends up with criminals in supply chains, and sadly, including supply chains that are related to sports and its industries and its suppliers. So, sport is about doing as best you can, whether you are at local level or whether you're at the international level. We all like to see people succeed. We all like to see the person who may not be able to do a sport very well do their best. We see the way sport has developed in the country where I live, in Ireland. The way it now includes women and girls in its sport is remarkable from perhaps 2 decades ago. We see the way the Paralympics has become as much followed as the Olympics. And we see the people who win those medals recognised in every way, shape and form as the people who win the gold medals in other sports. So let's make sport something that can change the agenda. Let's make sport where it is something where winning is really important, but winning is much bigger than just being on the field. That winning means that our games and our events and our focus and the finances it generates are not tainted with abuse, are not tainted with the fact that 22,000 children every year die in forced labour and exploitation, the fact that 50 million people are suffering at this time, and the fact that 236 billion in criminal assets is floating around, some of it within the sports industry. So I think the sports organisations can actually play a major role in ending this scourge of human trafficking and modern slavery that blights our world. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go straight to a video now that's been described to you. This is the testimony of a victim of human trafficking in the context of sport. Thank you.
As an 15-year-old Olympic-bound athlete, I was sexually abused by the adults that were interested in my training. And there were three different types of individuals. There was the professionals, the coach, and my parents. I had just taken 8th at the Junior Olympics in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they ran the story in the newspaper. And the lawyer read about it, and then he contacted my mother. And they started to meet over several months to talk about how the lawyer and his professional friends could help me pursue my Olympic dreams. The lawyer convinced my mother that he and his friends would provide funding for my training and travel, and also provide the family with assistance. Once he convinced my mother that this was the best offer, he insisted that she would help me by preparing me and have me ready whenever the professionals wanted to see me. He basically convinced my mother that the professionals would take me to dinners, parties, movies, events, and then in return, they would help the family with doctor's appointment, eye exams, medicines, etc. And my mother agreed. And then I had private dinners with the lawyers over several weeks, and he built on the dream of me wanting to become an Olympian and going to college. And he told me that I had to focus on getting good grades, being the best athlete I could be, and not to disappoint any other professionals. I grew to trust him and believe that he was a friend. The lawyer then began to take me to places to meet the other professionals, such as other lawyers and doctors and business owners. And I remember him telling me that these professionals were part of a secret men's group. And only those who wanted to help boys like me were permitted to join. And this process was a long process. And only the most trustworthy and prominent professionals were granted memberships. This tightly knit group of men protected each other and the boys that they helped. I was taken to the city to meet a doctor on several occasions, and at his mansion, which was known as the Ranch, and left for a week or the weekend. During these stays, the doctor would host parties for other professionals, and there were always about 4 or 5 young men, college student age, that were always there, and me. I think I was the only high school student at the time invited to these parties. And we were called the ponies. You were a pony if you were a novice, and then you were a colt if you'd been around for a little while. We were instructed to wear certain outfits that the doctor provided, and I always had to wear a white Speedo for some reason. We would line up in a row as the guests arrived, and they would look us over, and they would ask questions, interview us basically, and then they would be ushered to the back room or to the porch or some other part of the house, and they would place their bids. We were the object of a silent auction. After the bidding was closed, the top bidders would collect their boy prize, and they would spend the rest of the evening together. The boy that earned the highest bid got extra gifts from the doctors and some of the other professionals, such as money, watches, necklaces, clothes, etc. But every boy would have their tuition, books, meals, and sporting expenses taken care of. While all this was happening, the coach started grooming me to win his trust. He insisted that he knew what was going on and with the professionals, and he understood my situation, and he was the only person that I could talk to that would understand. He made me feel really special, and he was sympathetic, and he felt for me. He cared for me. He protected me. These were thoughts that I built up in my head about him. And he also shared that he never felt like this way towards someone, especially a male, since he was male, and that we had to keep it a secret because nobody would understand. And it would end everything. And nobody would ever want to work with me again if the truth ever came out. So once the coach was assured that I would not tell, and he had my trust, is when he started to take me to overnight trips to practice with the college team. And it was during these times that the sexual abuse started to happen. So I was confused. I had shame, embarrassment. Each week I was being passed to a new professional and enduring the abuse. And then while seeing the coach at practice every day, it created a whole bunch of confusion. I started questioning my orientation, my sexual orientation, who I was. How can I keep this a secret? So that's the story. Grooming and coercion are aspects that take time. For me, it was not a quick process. However, this is not always the case. And many people I have spoken with were rushed through the process and quickly forced into the trafficking situation. I know some people who were trafficked because they had run away when they were young and they were trying to live off the streets. But they were still groomed to trust the people that said that they would help them. But grooming and trafficking are not always the same and are conducted differently depending on the social and economic status. In my case, the professionals had all the money they needed, so they groomed slowly and yet still got the same end result. So it's different for each person.
Thank you all for watching that very difficult film. But it does shine light on how children's dreams can be built up and then destroyed by adults intent on abusing and, in this case, sexually exploiting children in the context of sport. My name is Parosha CHANDRAN. I'm a barrister. I've been a barrister in England for 27 years, and I am Professor of Practice at King's College London. I've spent the last 2 decades bringing cases to establish rights for trafficking victims. And for the last few years, I've been working with Lorena Bright as independent legal advisor to her and her organisation, Mission 89, aims to shed light on the plight of trafficking in the context of sport. So I'm delighted to hand over to Lorena now to make some remarks, please, in the context in which we're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor CHANDRAN, Your Excellency, Ambassador Michel Veuthey, and also co-organizer of this event, distinguished speakers and guests, panelists, guests as well, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to join this assembly of esteemed speakers and also anti-trafficking advocates today on the sidelines of the 56th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. I was truly heartened by Mr. Michael Lander's testimonial because so very few athletes come forward for the very obvious reason, and very few come forward to share their experiences. But John Michael has always been very consistent over the years in sharing his story and also spreading awareness. And he has been unwavering, I would say, in his advocacy also for justice and comprehensive solutions to protecting young athletes from the experience that he had. I think John Michael's experience speaks to the integrity and the humanity of sports, and we must do everything in our power to safeguard and protect young athletes from exploitation and trafficking. And so as the Executive Director of Mission 89, I'm proud to share the work of our organization, which spans many different fronts, from research and advocacy to education and collaboration, and always through partnerships. In terms of research, to date, we have conducted extensive studies to uncover the underlying mechanisms that facilitate trafficking in sports, highlighting the deceptive recruitment practices, the lack of regulatory oversight, and the vulnerabilities that traffickers exploit. Our recent project to define sports trafficking towards producing the first ever global thematic report on sports trafficking seeks to establish an understanding of the phenomena through common terminologies, definitions, and will form the backbone of our advocacy efforts including today's event. Part of the objective of this thematic report is to provide a legal framework to empower legislators, law enforcement, and the judiciary to take action. In terms of education and awareness, it's a cornerstone of our mission, which is to raise awareness among all stakeholders. We have developed educational programs and initiatives that are targeted at young athletes, clubs, families, coaches, and sports organizations. These programs aim to inform and empower individuals to recognize and resist trafficking and exploitation, and also to take action as well. Sorry. Oops. With collaboration and partnerships, we believe that combating trafficking in sports requires a united front. Over the years, Mission 89 has forged partnerships with key organizations, some of whom are here with us today, and which also include United Nations agencies. In particular, we do a lot of work with UN Migration, it's the International Organization for Migration. We also work very closely with the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association UK and Interpol. So through these collaborations, we support data collection and the development of comprehensive strategies to tackle trafficking. Our partnerships also extend to grassroots organizations in Kenya, in Lagos, in Egypt. We've also done work through IOM in Uruguay. And all this is done to ensure the impact that we have reaches local communities where it's needed most. In closing, I urge all of us here today to leverage our knowledge, our resources, and influence to make a real difference. Together, for sure, we can ensure that sport remains a source of hope and opportunity, free from the shadows of exploitation and abuse. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wright. I'd now like to turn to Ms. Catherine Leslie, who is the Safeguarding Senior Manager at FIFA. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor CHANDRAN, and to the Order of Malta and to Mission 89 for the invitation. And it's really my pleasure to be here on behalf of FIFA today to talk a little bit about what we do as the international governing body of world football. And it really speaks to a lot of what was mentioned by Kevin in his introduction about prevention work. And we look at this topic within our wider framework of human rights. And we work across multiple departments to try and primarily prevent the problem of trafficking within football, and of course working to find solutions when we can with the authorities. From our department's work, I work in the FIFA Safeguarding and Child Protection Department, and we do a lot of work primarily with our 211 member associations, or what you might be more familiar with knowing as football federations. So we work with them to ensure that they have safeguarding systems in place at national level to prevent all kinds of harm and abuse and exploitation within football. So not only a focus on trafficking, but on the wider issues that we just heard Michael speaking about. So prevention around sexual abuse and grooming, neglect, physical abuse, exploitation, and of course trafficking. So we do a lot of work, education and awareness raising with our 211 members to help them put these systems in place at national level, from grassroots to club level right up to the pro league games in their country. This is a huge part of the work that we do in the FIFA Safeguarding Department, but we also work very closely with our World Cup division to ensure that hosts of FIFA World Cups also take this consideration into account when hosting. For example, in preparation for 2026, we're working closely with the federal and state level governments and authorities and host cities across the USA, Mexico and Canada. They have already conducted at city level human rights risk assessment. So as John has said, as Michael had said, or Kevin, sorry, not just at the time of the event itself, but in advance, pre-planning, considering what are the potential risks, what are the potential worry areas when hosting a major event. So these human rights risk assessments across all host cities have already been conducted. And indeed, trafficking has been highlighted in the majority of cities as a potential risk and problem area for the hosting of the World Cup. So the host cities at the moment are in the process of developing their wider human rights strategies, which will address a number of human rights risks related to the hosting, including, of course, trafficking and what safeguarding measures need to be in place in the lead up to the World Cup, but also, of course, during competition time. This is something that's very much led by the host city authorities. So, for example, police, social services, child protection agencies, immigration offices. It's also something that's built into the hosting agreements with major industries, for example, the airline industries, the hotel industries, that they also have this as part of their processes when preparing to be a major host of the upcoming World Cup. We also, in our work as part of our prevention, we take into consideration risk assessing everything that we do and looking at the risk areas across the ecosystem of football, which, as you can imagine, is the world's biggest sport and has a huge footprint. What we have become aware of, thanks to the great work of Mission 89, is a very particular risk area around the role of football agents. And over the last years, the new FIFA football agents regulations have brought in new mandatory requirements to try and address the problem, first and foremost, of there being fake agents that promise young boys, as was highlighted, fake dreams to create a better life somewhere else, most often than not in a club in Europe. So we're really trying hard to tackle this problem. And we've been doing this in a number of ways. So, for example, the new FIFA agents regulations have a number of requirements. If, for example, you want to represent a minor in football, you have to go through a number of steps through professional education, ongoing and continuous professional development, including education on safeguarding and anti-trafficking. You have to be registered as a FIFA agent, so your license made publicly available on the global database. This is a database that anybody could access. So if, for example, you are a parent and your child has been approached by a person claiming to be an agent, you can ask for their agent's card, you can scan the QR code, you can check it on the publicly available database to see if this person is in fact a legitimate agent that could represent your child. So these are some of the major new regulations that have come into force. Of course, we can do our best to regulate the industry, but there's always going to be criminals that try and exploit the industry, and that's where, of course, the role of the authorities come in to help sports to try and combat the problem. We do a lot of work, and we're about to embark on work to raise the bar when it comes to education and awareness raising on the role of football agents. And the examples that we've heard about promising young footballers their dreams that may not be really met. Quite often they're dreams that seem too good to be true, and they often are. So we're in the preparation of a handbook, a very simplified, child-friendly parental handbook in several and multiple languages to give parents and young players very simple and easy to understand information about what they should know about in terms of their rights, but also what to do if they are approached by an agent or somebody claiming to be an agent, so that they understand what to do, how they can do checks and balances, how they can check on the system to see if they're legitimate, and also to understand what might be some red flags for them to be aware of, to think about what to do next and where to report. We're working across a number of departments at FIFA to see how we can tackle this, like I said, as part of our wider work on safeguarding and human rights. But of course it's an ongoing battle for us, as it is any sport.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was really extraordinary explanation of all the work that FIFA is doing. I'm grateful. Now we will pass on, if I may, to Miss Amy Park, who is Head of Integrity at the World Baseball Softball Confederation. We only have 10 minutes in the room, so that's why I'm afraid everyone is being kept. Thank you very much.
Great. So I'll be pretty quick. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Amy Park, and I'm in charge of the Integrity Unit at the International Sport Body for Baseball and Softball, World Baseball Softball Confederation. Unlike FIFA, where you see, compared to FIFA, we are very smaller as an organization involving very much smaller group of people working. But we are also fast-growing, constantly trying to be like soccer, trying to promote the sport of baseball and softball in many countries to the young generations, to keep our sport alive. Even though I want to say that the baseball and softball is sport being played around the world, I must say that there's a common understanding that this sport is played majorly in Americas, and East Asia. And this includes many of the Latin American countries who were highly exposed to the human trafficking in sport. It's common practice and understanding in those cultures, in those countries, that the sport is being used as a tool for survival. By excelling in the baseball and softball, young athletes, they get an opportunity to work, opportunity for a scholarship, to join the clubs, to get a decent job as a professional player or coach, get a decent earnings as well. But to get to that certain level, many of the young athletes they're being recruited by the agencies, they're being taken to the academies, they're being sponsored for their education, place to stay, food, or to get proper professional trainings, only to later find out that when they are being sold to the major clubs when signing the contract, and the agency is taking up to 80% of their signing bonus. And this problem is not on these agencies only, because even if you shut down those agencies, young athletes in a desperate situation, they would still look for any ways to get trained. And there will be another agencies, they will pop up and offer them more or less the same, taking advantage of players' pockets. And because the demand is high, it also drives a high volume of the supply. And to fix this issue requires really a lot of cooperation of many organizations, like Kevin noted, like police. Everyone in different organizations, in the policy-making level, and also in education, also for the young athletes, but also the parents. And as an international organization with a World Cup starting at the age of under 12 category, we understood the importance of the education that we could give to the teams and to the athletes directly during the World Cups, and who can be vulnerable when they go back to their home country after the World Cup. And just as Rome was not built in a day, we also started by forming an integrity unit, where a dedicated unit that could handle all these kind of topics. And as one of the founding members, we reviewed and adopted all the existing rules and regulations, and retailored our version to reflect our situation, my sport, and the structure that we have, and not the other sports. We started educating the Continental Association and National Federation, like the FIFA did, not up to that level, but we are trying. And also various individuals, like not only the athletes, but also like officials who are very close to the athletes as well. Not to mention that we have started appointing the safeguarding officers who can be easily reachable in case of any issues, delivering on-site and online workshops, conducting the background checks on individuals as well. So going back to this trafficking in our sport, unfortunately, it is a long-term homework for us to find a solution, and a solution to help not only those who need a support, who are already being trafficked, but also a solution to what makes our players not fall into the hands of the traffickers. And maybe something to share, that one of the good examples that one of our national federation did as part of the anti-trafficking method, was that they realized that they cannot get rid of those agencies and academies. So they instead decided to build a reliable one, so that the athletes can get the proper needs, such as food, shelter, and training and education, without being exploited. And this is something that maybe we should explore in more depth and find a way to share it with the National Federation and all the other sports federation. This could be a good solution.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, we've just been told that we've got about another 15 minutes, so we have time to continue the discussion. And so I thought it'd be very nice to open the discussion up to the floor for a few minutes. If anyone has a contribution, if we could please limit it to a minute and a half. If anyone has a question, please let me know who you would like to direct the question to, or if it's a general question for the panel. And in asking your question, if you can identify yourself, that would also be very helpful. Thank you. Any contributions or questions? Okay, so maybe I will start with a question to Catherine. So the work that FIFA has been doing has been very impressive in terms of looking recently at the agents, the football agents in particular. As a human rights barrister, it's always struck me that children should only be given into the hands of somebody who is authorized to take care of that child, where there is a system of accountability, and yet that isn't something that ordinarily takes place in the world when it comes to handing over children in the context of any sport. What thoughts do you have broader than perhaps the FIFA, scheme, which we've yet to see, how it operates in practice on this topic of registered and unregistered recruitment agents, and how precarious a child's life becomes when they're in the hands of someone who has no accountability at all. Thank you.
I mean, it's a great question, and I always go back to my motherly instincts when you think about a child being handed over to somebody else. And my child goes to creche, and you know that thankfully everybody that works in the creche has been vetted, they've been background checked, they've been trained, and you know that you're handing over your child in the care of somebody else for a few hours, and that they're in good hands. But this is unfortunately not always the place in other sectors, and certainly not in sport around the world. And I think if you look at the legal framework around football agents, it's clear that what FIFA can do to license and check the validity of a license of a football agent is one piece. However, they're still operating in a system at national level that makes them bound to national law. So if, for example, in a country it's not legal by law to, for example, have to undergo a background check, then this gives a gap in the system at national level for agents to operate. They still have to operate under FIFA rules and conditions, but there's gaps in the systems at national level if it's not mandatory by law by the government. So I think from this perspective, it makes me think of the importance of sports and governments working together, and that safeguarding systems or child protection systems that are in place at national level, that they need to meet with sports. They need to meet with sports to ensure that what laws are in place at national level apply to the operations and licensing of sports professionals, be they an agent or a football coach or whoever. The laws need to meet and match, and sports need to also be proactive in reaching out to them. But if those laws aren't in place, it leaves a huge gap for sports and for vulnerability to happen.
Thank you. I mean, definitely gives a lot of food for thought going forward in terms of what policies and potentially legislative changes may be needed. Would anyone like to step in at this point? Yes, thank you very much. Would you introduce yourself? Thank you.
Yes, hi. My name is Jamie Leitner. I'm currently a student at the University of London for Human Rights Masters. My background is compliance and business ethics for corporations. I also have a postgrad in football business. And the theme I come across working with corporations is a lot like what Mr. Hyland referenced, which is we have our Modern Slavery Act. What they write isn't necessarily always what they do. The biggest gap I found is follow-up and follow-through to ensure accountability is met. So from the sports industry perspective, both for Mr. Hyland and maybe Ms. Leslie, you have 211 members, and then of course the state's responsibility for ensuring compliance with the Act. Where are we with this? Where do you think we can move forward to ensure compliance with the associations who are responsible for sports in general?
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn that question to Kevin. Thank you.
So
Thank you. I think that part of that is under review with the new legislations that we're seeing coming out, because it does impact on, big business. Okay, in the EU it's going to be 450 million and 1,000 employees, but that will cover most of the big football federations and also FIFA and some of the other organisations that will have to do a meaningful statement that will have to show up and down. And so that means that what they write, they have to be able to stand over and have to be able to show that it's right. And then, of course, with more legislation like Canada, with Australia, with its and the ASEAN Federation looking at new legislation, I think, as we've heard with FIFA, there is a change. As we know, things are slow. But I think, with the US using more the Customs and Border Protection, let's see how that's used against the World Cup, and particularly in franchises and organisations, particularly importing stuff. When we're using all those properly, and bearing in mind we're still not using the ILO Forced Labour Protocol from 1930 properly, we need to focus in on those instruments, make sure they're properly understood, properly implemented, properly enforced, and I think we're starting to see the shoots of that, particularly with the EU legislation.
Just as a lawyer, just coming in there, the reference to ILO Convention 1930 is on forced labour, and there's a 2014 protocol to the ILO Forced Labour Convention, which is very interesting to read. It includes identification rights for victims of forced labour, remedies including compensation, it includes a non-punishment provision. It's very progressive. And it's very good to look at that in the context of this work as well. Thank you very much, Kevin. We have another question there. Thank you.
Zarine Hayes from Widows' Rights International. Actually, I'm sorry I came in late. I'm not sure if you covered this or not, but I wanted to ask about trafficking of women for forced prostitution in times of sports events. Wherever you have a large group of men, you always have a huge number of forced prostitution. And I mean, maybe we shouldn't even use the term forced prostitution, because some people would say that all prostitution is forced, but we know that in the World Cups you have a huge increase in the numbers of women who trafficked. We know that for the World Cup in Germany, where prostitution is legalized, there were football fanzines who were advertising to punters that they could, part of their ticket price was a visit to a brothel. And what is FIFA and other organisations doing to prevent the trafficking of women for prostitution at sports events?
I'm going to pass that. I will just say, I'm sorry you arrived late. Kevin did talk about that. So for everybody else here present, he did mention about the trafficking of women for sexual exploitation in sporting events. I don't know if he wants to briefly add to that, and I don't know if, Leslie, you want to comment as well, very briefly. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very briefly, some of the plans that we're trying, and I think that FIFA have echoed this, is about planning towards the events and building in things that make that not happen, like was done in the 2012 Olympics. But I think actually, there's another part of it that's associated to criminality, exploitation, trafficking. So we need to look at all the risks and start to mitigate them in a collective way, not just during the event. And like the NFL, I know they're starting to work sooner on the issue than just at the event itself.
Exactly, and from our side, I had mentioned earlier that, for example, in the build-up to the next major World Cup, which of course is in 2026 in the USA and Canada, the risk assessing for this competition has already started. It's underway, and we've been working with the federal and state authorities and each of the host cities to undergo a complete human rights risk assessment to consider all the risk of harm that may occur in the lead up to and during the World Cup in 26. These host city level risk assessments have been concluded, and indeed trafficking and exploitation have been highlighted as a major concern for the host cities. So what the cities are now doing, they're in the process of developing human rights strategies to identify these risks that have been highlighted as seriously potential harm and high likelihood to happen. And the human rights strategies of the host cities are being led by the public authorities in each of the states. So, for example, the police, social services, child protection agencies, immigration. They're very much leading on this at host city level to already on in 2024, 2 years ahead of the event, to plan to address the risk, primarily for prevention, but of course to have or to expedite and to have the systems in place should there be an increase in cases. But hopefully, as Kevin highlighted, the aim is to prevent it from happening, and it's been identified in the risk assessments that have already been conducted for 26.
Thank you so much. Brilliant. Now, I just wanted to turn to you, Amy. Do you have any observations to make either on the recruitment agent side of this, that the agencies that are being used, or from your own perspective on softball, basketball? Where do you really see the risks, and where do you see areas that need improvement? Thank you.
I think to answer this question, I think we need to understand a little bit structure of how the sport organizations work. So in baseball and softball, we have a WBSC, which is working as an international federation governing body for the baseball softball, who is the main aim of this organization is to promote the event, to promote the baseball and softball worldwide. While we have a private sector, which many of people might know is called MLB, Major League Baseball, which is a private organization who is paying a lot of money to the athletes, trying to earn the money from the pockets of the spectators as well. For them is a business, and I see the risk that there is, again, the supply and demand over here. There is no specific, I cannot say that there is a risk more in this and more in that, but I would say the entire concept of business, that there is a demand and there is always a supply. So
no, I think it's a very good point. It's the nature of the game that the demand propels the risk. So thank you very much. That's very interesting. We have a question from this lady over here. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Thanks very much to all the panelists for the very interesting inputs. I'm Maria Mercedes Rossi from APG23. We are involved also with human trafficking advocacy and so on. I would like to ask this question: how is the state of the art of research and data collection on the issue of human trafficking in sports? And that's because it seems to me that it's not so developed as an area. And I think that this is a very important topic also to be recommended to the Special Rapporteur on trafficking in person to tackle it in the next reports. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for asking that important question. I'm going to turn to Lorena Bright at Mission 89 because they are very much at the forefront of leading research on the exact topic of sports trafficking and data collection. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that question. As you can imagine, data around such a topic is very difficult to come across. Firstly, because many of the victims don't know that they've been victimized, and so it's very difficult for the identification process. So how we're working around this now is through, again, partnerships. We do a lot through IOM, for example, and through their country offices. We're able to collect data, and how we've begun that process is actually through the development of this, coming up with a legal definition of trafficking, because we believe once there's a definition, then people know what we're talking about. And for the past few years, there are these two sometimes conflated aspects of trafficking, which is trafficking in sports, trafficking through sports. But now that we have a definition of what trafficking is, and that's communicated to the different agencies that we work with, such as Interpol and certain UN agencies, and through their country offices, we're able to collect that data, because what we've learned is that they have case files, but they haven't been able, and they know that at least at a minimum, it amounts to labor exploitation or sexual exploitation. And now they will have the tools to actually determine whether those cases that they think could be football trafficking or baseball trafficking actually amount to, yes, sports trafficking. So.
Thank you. I think it's a very good point about raising this to the attention of the Special Rapporteur on Trafficking Persons. She may have it on her agenda already, but I'll make sure that she does. Yes. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very rare to receive information about human trafficking, because it's a niche. It's even more difficult to get a perspective on sports, so thank you very much. My name is Damiano Tofono. I work as a forced migration advisor for the ICFA, which is an umbrella organization based here in Geneva. And my question to the panelists was, how can NGOs support the federations, for instance, in this specific prevention of the events? I do understand that there is a targeting now on the football or other major events. Well, it was researched back in the past, so there is a direct link between the events and the trafficking phenomenon. So how could NGOs, specifically in local, provide you with support and as well as contribute to the risk assessment? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just before I pass that to Leslie, is the question very targeted to FIFA? Because you mentioned the federation.
We are working more putting the accent on migrations, meaning that we need the link with the sports, and I see not just FIFA, but all the federations organizing events as potentially...
all sports federations. Okay, so how can NGOs support sports federations in obtaining data on trafficking? Okay, does anyone want to give a position on that, or I can say something even. Yeah. I'll start. Thank you very much. So, I think trafficking in the context of sport has many various features to it. So you have, on the one hand, many of the stories that have been described over the last few Olympic Games and then in Qatar and World Cups, where the suggestion and the news story is, about the increase in sex trafficking at those spots. And then when you start looking into it, you see that there's some discrepancies about figures and numbers and whether the Super Bowl in America's top cop prosecutor really did prosecute, 50 times more human traffickers during that period of time or not. So there's research that's needed in respect of that. Then separately to that, you have the recruitment of children for different sports by agents who have the intention of exploiting them. That would qualify as human trafficking of children or young athletes for the purposes of exploitation in sport. And this is a new, an emerging form of exploitation that is now receiving, of course, the attention of Mission 89, and the other agencies are looking at it as well. But the identification of actual cases where this has happened is still something that's taking time to achieve. Now, that's for a number of, and so this is all linked to your question, what can NGOs do to support? I think from my perspective is that we need to understand more about this in order to then assist NGOs to know what to do to support federations, because just like the gentleman in the movie was saying, it happened to him when he was a child. It's taken like 40 years for him to express what has happened to him. Children are so vulnerable. When something bad happens to them, when an adult does something to them, they think that they've done something wrong that maybe has made that happen to them, or that if they say something that they won't be believed, Or if they say something, what will happen to me if I say this thing? So there's so many layers of pressure on a child to even say what has happened to them during that time. And even in the Western world, years later, it can take 4 decades. So we do need to work out how to prevent this type of harm. And I think myself, there's a lot of, to have people in the room and wanting to talk about this, to have the true leadership of Ambassador Veuthey to convene this type of meeting and for the United Nations to support it is really what's needed in order to answer that question eventually, which is one of the key questions, because victims will go more to civil society and civil society will be more interested in identifying victims than usually the state. I'll move to Lorena now. Thank you.
Just quickly on that, I think for NGOs have different capacities, so obviously they can play a role in terms of awareness raising, they can play a role in terms of training. For many athletes, NGOs on the ground are the first point of contact, and it's through that interaction between, let's say, a footballer or a baseballer who finds himself or herself at, let's say, a local shelter. That's how come we get to have this, data. But for an NGO to even be able to ascertain whether that athlete is a victim of trafficking, they have to know exactly what sport trafficking is. And so I would ask that there's a little bit more patience as we complete and conclude this global thematic report on sport trafficking, which gives a definition of sport trafficking and then also gives typologies and terminologies that will help not only civil society organizations, but obviously law enforcement to know exactly what they're looking at, and therefore be able to confidently say that they are they're looking at a case of sport trafficking. And it's only from that point on, I think that we can then start efficiently and impactfully engaging with civil society, whereby we can develop trainings that are specific to athletes, awareness, impactful awareness raising campaigns, and so forth. So I think the definition is key. Yeah.
Perhaps not, if that's okay, but your last one was as well. For the sake of
yes, just a second, just to say, no, definitely, we can go on till the end of the day or the year. But actually, I would like to say that we have 40 webinars, and have a look at them. And I'm pretty sure you will find many good practices, not only from the Order of Malta, but also from governments, international organizations, NGOs, and religious congregations to prevent, combat, and also to help victims. And I think today we had a good sample of good practices. It will be easy to go on with this, but now I'm very grateful for all speakers and all questions, and I think let's go on with this, definitely. We have a lot to say, and we have a lot more to do.
So shall we conclude this? So with those wise words, and with great thanks, thank you very much, Your Excellency, and thank you all for coming today to join us, and thank you to our wonderful panelists and speakers. Thank you. Keep up the fight.
Yeah. Thank you, Parosha. It was excellent.